I'm about to expose will show you how South Africa's president went from humiliating himself on a phone call to an even more desperate act. And if you want to understand how badly our leader has mismanaged this crisis, you need to see the pathetic display of political panic I'm about to show you.
President Cyril Ramaphosa has held a telephone discussion with President Vladimir Putin of the Russian Federation. The discussion follows President Putin's request to brief President Ramaphosa on the peace process with Ukraine and to engage on issues of mutual bilateral interest. President Putin has expressed his recognition and appreciation for South Africa's involvement in advancing a peace process between Russia and Ukraine.
President Cyril Ramaphosa held a telephone discussion during the morning of the 6th of August 2025 with U.S. President Donald Trump on bilateral trade matters. The two leaders undertook to continue with further engagements, recognizing the various trade negotiations the U.S. is currently involved in. Respective trade negotiating teams will take forward more detailed discussions.
Just when you thought Ramaphosa's begging phone call to Trump was rock bottom, our president managed to find a new low. Within 24 hours of desperately calling Trump about the 30% tariffs that are crushing our economy, Ramaphosa picked up the phone again, this time to call Vladimir Putin. According to the Kremlin press service, Cyril Ramaphosa thanked the Russian leader for providing information about Trump's peace efforts in Ukraine. But let's be honest about what this call really was. A desperate attempt to get Russia's help in dealing with the American economic punishment that's about to destroy South Africa. While Ramaphosa spoke to Trump mainly about the massive 30% trade tariffs that were hit South Africa, the call with Putin was supposedly about Trump's efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war. But come on. You don't call Putin one day after your economy gets tariffed into oblivion just to talk about peace. The timeline of desperation proves my point. Let me paint you a picture of just how frantic Ramaphosa has become. August 6th, 2025, Ramaphosa calls Trump begging for mercy as 30% tariffs are about to destroy our export economy. August 7th, 2025, the tariffs take effect. South African goods are entering the US market now like an economic sledgehammer. August 7, 2025, same day, Ramaphosa immediately calls Putin, supposedly about peace, but seeking away from the timeline of America's biggest hit to us. This is desperation. This is a man scrambling to find anyone who might help him escape the consequences of his own terrible decisions. The BRICS lifeline fantasy is what Ramaphosa was really hoping from his phone call. Because he wants Russia and the BRICS bloc to somehow save South Africa from American economic punishment. But there's just one problem. Trump has already threatened the entire BRICS alliance. Any country aligning themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will be charged an additional 10% tariff, Trump declared. So Ramaphosa's brilliant strategy is to run to the very same organization that Trump has specifically threatened with even more tariffs. It's like escaping from a burning building by jumping into a volcano. Putin's information sharing is not what happened. Here's the real story. The official story is that Putin was briefing Ramaphosa about US envoying discussions regarding Ukraine peace efforts. Putin held a phone call with President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa, with Ramaphosa thanking the Russian leader for providing the information. But let's read between the lines here. Putin is notorious for using economic leverage and strategic partnerships to counter American influence. When a desperate African leader calls him right after getting economically hammered by America, Putin sees opportunity, not charity. This information sharing is really Putin positioning himself as the alternative to American dominance, exactly what Trump was warning against when he threatened BRICS with additional tariffs. The hero complex that is destroying South Africa is this, because here is the root of Ramaphosa's problem. Instead of simply doing what Trump asked, address land reforms, controlling anti-American rhetoric, managing international relationships responsibly, Cyril wanted to be the hero. He wanted to stand up to America, show South African sovereignty, and prove that he didn't take orders from anyone. How's that working for you, Mr. President? Your hero complex has destroyed our relationship with our biggest trading partner, has triggered 30% tariffs that will eliminate hundreds of thousands of jobs, forced you to make humiliating phone calls begging for mercy, pushed you into the arms of Putin and Russia, made South Africa look weak and desperate internationally as well. Here is the regret nobody will admit. You can see the regret in every desperate phone call, every urgent support measure, every scrambling attempt to find alternatives to American trade. Ramaphosa knows he screwed up, but his pride won't let him admit it. He is regretting signing the land expropriation bill, despite American warnings, allowing ministers to make inflammatory declining empire statements, failing to control the kill the Boer rhetoric that horrified international partners, not taking Trump's warnings seriously, choosing ideology over economic pragmatism, but instead of taking responsibility and fixing the real problems, he's doubling down by calling Putin for help. The Russian trap Ramaphosa is walking into is crazy, because Putin isn't offering help out of the goodness of his heart. When desperate leaders call Moscow for assistance against American pressure, Russia always extracts a price: military cooperation. Russia will want closer defense ties, weapon sales, maybe even military bases. Resource access. Russia will demand preferential access to South Africa's minerals and strategic resources. Diplomatic supports. South Africa will be expected to support Russia in international forums, UN votes, and global disputes. Economic dependency. Russian investment and trade will come with strings attached, making South Africa dependent on Moscow's goodwill. Ramaphosa is trading American economic pressure for Russian political control, and he thinks this is an improvement. This is the BRICS delusion I have exposed. Trump has been crystal clear about his view of BRICS. Any country allying themselves with the anti-American policies of BRICS will face additional 10% tariffs. The BRICS includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, and the United Arab Emirates. So Ramaphosa's master plan is to run deeper into the very organization Trump has specifically threatened with more economic punishment. It's like responding to a speeding ticket by driving faster. The China factor is also what nobody is discussing. Because while Ramaphosa is calling Putin, let's not forget that China has already offered to soften the impact of US tariffs on Africa. Both Russia and China are circling like vultures around South Africa's economic crisis, each wanting to position themselves as their savior. These are not saviors. They are competitors for American influence, and they see South Africa's crisis as an opportunity to pull us into their sphere of control. Ramaphosa's desperation is literally auctioning off South Africa's independence to the highest bidder. The international embarrassment has been multiplied tenfold. Bad enough that Ramaphosa had to beg Trump for mercy. Now he's calling out Putin for help with his Trump problem. This makes South Africa look like a weak, desperate nation that can't manage its own international relationships. Other world leaders are watching this and saying, how? South Africa's picking fights it cannot win, and then it runs crying to America's enemies for help. How can we trust them as a reliable partner? Here is the economic reality Putin cannot fix. This is what Ramaphosa doesn't seem to understand. Putin can't solve South Africa's American tariff problem. Russia doesn't buy South African cars, citrus, or agricultural products at the scale America does. Russia can't replace American investment, American technology, or American markets. All Putin can offer is political support against American imperialism, alternative trading relationships that don't replace what we've lost, military cooperation that will further anger America, diplomatic backing that makes us look like a Russian client state. None of this fixed the fundamental problem. South Africa needs American trade, and Ramaphosa destroyed that relationship in front of your very eyes. Every opposition party in South Africa is probably celebrating this humiliating display of incompetence. They are probably saying, this is your ANC government. Pick fights with our biggest trading partner, then go begging to dictators for help. They destroyed hundreds of thousands of jobs, then called Putin to fix their mess. Your president turned South Africa into a global laughingstock in less than 24 hours. The real reason for the Putin call is this. Let me tell you what really happened on that call, because it wasn't just about Ukrainian peace processes. Ramaphosa, Vladimir, Trump is destroying our economy with these tariffs. Please, BRICS must help us to find alternative markets. Of course, Cyril, Russia always be a reliable partner to South Africa. Unlike America, we respect our sovereignty. We respect your sovereignty. Good, Putin. We need options. Our people are going to suffer because of these American tariffs. Yes, there are always options for countries willing to align with Russia's vision for multipolar world. This wasn't about peace. This was about Ramaphosa prostrating himself before Putin, begging for economic alternatives to replace what his incompetence destroyed. The official line is that they discussed Trump's efforts to end the Russia-Ukraine war, with Putin briefing Ramaphosa on his meeting with Trump's envoy. But this is just diplomatic cover for what was really a crisis call about economic survival. Ramaphosa is using the Ukraine situation as an excuse to justify calling Putin for help for his economic disaster. It's like saying you called the fire department to discuss weather patterns while your house is burning down. As if anyone is going to believe what you just said. Ramaphosa thought he was clever. He thought he was protecting South African sovereignty by standing up to America. Instead, he surrendered that sovereignty to whoever offers to help him escape the consequences of his decisions. Real sovereignty would have been managing relationships responsibly, addressing legitimate international concerns, and prioritizing South African economic interests over ideological posturing. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the price of playing the hero. This is what happens when leaders prioritize looking tough over being effective. Your economy gets destroyed. Your people lose their jobs. You get humiliated internationally. You end up begging enemies of your former partners for help. You trade one form of dependency for another, worse one. Ramaphosa wanted to be the hero who stood up to American imperialism. Instead, he became the villain who destroyed South African prosperity, and then went crawling to Putin on his knees for help. This betrays the youth as well. Young South Africans are watching their president destroy their economic future through ideological stubbornness, then desperately call dictators for help. What kind of leadership example is this? Instead of teaching pragmatism, responsibility, and strategic thinking, Ramaphosa is showing them that picking fights you can't win is principled, destroying economic relationships is sovereignty, begging authoritarian leaders for help is diplomacy. And this is the coming Russian influence campaign because of that. Mark my words, Putin will now use South Africa's desperation to expand Russian influence throughout Africa. He'll position Russia as the defender of African sovereignty against American economic imperialism. Every desperate phone call from African leaders gives Putin more leverage to build an anti-Western coalition. And Ramaphosa just handed him the perfect opportunity. This is what I like to call a multiple crisis reality. While Ramaphosa makes desperate phone calls to world leaders, South Africans are facing 30% tariffs, making everything more expensive, job losses in export industries, reduced economic growth, growth instability, and Chinese and Russian influence. International isolation from Western partners as well. But sure, let's call Putin about peace processes, right? The bottom line is this. In just 24 hours, Ramaphosa went from begging America's president for mercy to seeking help from America's biggest rival. This isn't diplomacy, this is desperation disguised as foreign policy. He could have avoided all of this by simply addressing Trump's concerns about land reform and anti-American rhetoric. Instead, he chose to be the hero, the John Cena and Hulk Hogan, and chose to act like a fool who didn't understand the basic consequences of this. And the pathetic part? Putin is probably laughing right now at how easily South Africa's crisis handed him another opportunity to undermine American influence in Africa. This is strategic disaster because instead of one problem, American tariffs, Ramaphosa now has multiple problems. American economic punishment, potential additional BRICS tariffs, Russian expectations for cooperation, Chinese demands for preferential treatment, international reputation damage, domestic economic crisis. This is what happens when you try to play geopolitical chess without understanding the rules. The final irony is that Ramaphosa destroyed South Africa's relationship with the country that could actually help our economy, America, and then ran to countries that can't replace what we've lost, China and Russia. America bought our cars, our agricultural products, invested in our businesses, provided technology transfer, gave us WWE. Russia and China offer political support, military cooperation, and resistance extension deals that benefit them and not us. This is why you must subscribe. Share this analysis with every South African who needs to understand how badly our president has mismanaged this crisis and demand leadership that puts South African interests above ideological posturing. Ramaphosa's double humiliation in 24 hours, begging Trump, calling Putin, perfectly captures how his hero complex has turned into a nightmare for ordinary South Africans. When your principled foreign policy requires desperate phone calls to dictators, maybe your principles were just expensive mistakes all along.